Welcome to the Mastering Kendo UI video course. My name is Chuck Catron, and I have been a software developer for the last 16 years. In this video, we will be getting the environment ready, and we'll start with the basics of using the Code Anywhere IDE. Start off by downloading the code from pack. Now we need to right-click on DevBox and then select New DevBox. Choose HTML for the stack and give your application a name. Once the DevBox has been created, you can then right-click on the new DevBox and select Upload, and then drag and drop the source you downloaded from pack into the upload window. As you can see by the folder structure, I like to keep things simple. We have a scripts folder, and inside of that we have a lib folder for all of the third-party libraries. We have a models folder for all the models used in our application. And then outside of the scripts folder, we have a templates folder, and these are all the HTML templates that we are going to use to make up our SPA application. We have a CSS folder and an images folder. We also have an index.html file. This is not a really complex structure, and I always try to keep it that way. Now that we have our core site functionality working, next we are going to add Kendo UI and then Twitter Bootstrap to the site. In the last video, we got our site configured and running. But since this is a video series about Kendo UI, we need to get the Kendo UI files added. Your next step is to incorporate Kendo UI into your own web application. For that, let's go get the styles for Kendo UI. As you can see, there are many built-in styles to choose from. For this course, I will be using the Kendo UI Bootstrap style. You can start by creating a Kendo folder in your application's CSS folder. Now right-click on the Kendo folder and select Upload. On your computer, navigate to the Kendo UI installation folder and open the Styles folder. Next, Control-click on the Bootstrap folder, Kendo Common Min CSS, and Kendo Bootstrap Min CSS. Next, drag and drop the files and the folder onto the upload window in the Code Anywhere IDE. Now you need to add the Kendo UI parts to the scripts lib folder. Just like before, go ahead and drag drop the Kendo all min.js and Kendo all min.js map files to the scripts lib folder. You will also need to grab the jQuery min.js out of the Kendo folder from your installation drive. Now it always pays to test your Kendo UI setup, as it saves both time and frustration if you know that you have a working setup. We need to add Kendo UI references to the application. Once you have the Kendo UI files and the layout page, let's take a simple div and test that Kendo UI is working correctly. It is. Now you have your application running. Next, we are going to add Twitter Bootstrap to the site and then explore the Telerik backend services interface and get the basic data structure set up. Now that we have a working web application with Kendo UI included, we need to add some style to the application. Since I am a developer, I do not have a designer frame of mind. I like to use Twitter Bootstrap as not only a great design tool, but it has the ability to make your site responsive. Let's get started by adding Twitter Bootstrap to your site. Now let's add the CSS files for Twitter Bootstrap to our application's CSS folder, and then add the CSS link to the index.html file. Now let's add the JS files. Now that we have a working web application with Kendo UI included, we need to add some style to the application. Since I am a developer, I do not have a designer frame of mind. I like to use Twitter Bootstrap. Twitter Bootstrap is not only a great design tool, but it has the ability to make your site responsive. Let's get started by adding Twitter Bootstrap to your site. First, let's add the CSS files for Twitter Bootstrap to our application's CSS folder, and then add the CSS link to the index.html file. Now, let's add the JavaScript files for Twitter Bootstrap to our application's scripts lib folder. Then add the links into the index.html file. Okay, let's edit the index.html file and add the basic layout to the HTML. First, we need to go ahead and work our design from outside in. This starts with the content wrapper and then works on inwards to the menu. Once we get all this in place, let's test out our application. Here we have the content wrapper, and here is the menu. This will show you the magic of Twitter Bootstrap. As the screen size changes, next, we need to start looking at how we are going to store our data. Now that we have a working web application with Kendo UI included and Twitter Bootstrap included, we need to start looking at how we are going to store our data. Let's get started by connecting to http://telerik.com, and I use Chrome. If you don't have an account, go ahead and sign up for a free 30-day trial account. Now let's go ahead and log into the Telerik platform. From the top left corner, you should see Create Workspace. Give your workspace a name like Mastering Kendo UI and select Create Workspace. Once your new workspace is created, you can then select Create Backend Service. Make sure that you have Start from Scratch selected and give it a name, like Mastering Kendo UI Data or Chuck is really friggin' awesome. In the main page for your project, you will see the statistics of your usage. This is how much data you're pushing and you're pulling, little things like that. How many push notifications. Now, if you'll look on the left here, you will see API keys. These are used so that your JavaScript code has access to the data store. Next, you will see types, and you can think of the types like tables in SQL. But just realize, this is not SQL. It is big data, and these are actually called documents. Then we see users, and these are the people who have actually signed up at your site. I will be covering this in more detail when we go over the Create Account section of the site. And then, in this last section, we're going to be going over is the roles. And these are the user roles, like registered and admin roles, that control what the user can do and see in the website. As I talk and highlight, you get to type. First, create a new content type called content. Also, add a field called content and set its type to text. Next, we're going to add a field called page ID, and the type is number. Then we're going to add title, the type is text, and then select Save. The next content type is blogs, and it has the following fields. We have blog ID, that's a number. SEO title, that's a type text. Title, and that one's also typed. Save it. Next content type is blog posts with the fields blog, and that's a relation to the blogs type. Content, type text. Post date, it's a type of date time. Published, it's a yes no field. It's Telerik's answer to the Boolean. Published date time, it's a date time type field. Summary, it's a type text. Title, it's a type text. Go ahead and save. The next content type is blog comments with the fields. Approved, yes no type. Comment, type text. Comment date time, it's a date time field. And we have post, and it's a relation to blog posts. Now let's go ahead and open up the roles section, and you will see register as a default role, or registered. All we need to do is add an admin role. Follow along with me, and we will head over to the download section and get the URL for the latest version of the JavaScript for running our connection to the backend services. First, in Download SDKs and Tools section, select Backend Services. Next, select Hybrid and Web for the platform, and then in Step 2, highlight and copy the URL for the Everlive All-Min.js file. Now that we have the URL, all we need to do is simply add it to the index.html file. In this video, we learned about the basics, the very basics, of Telerik's backend services interface, how to set up the basic content types and set up user roles, and how to include the Everlive JavaScript library in our web application. Next, we start getting into some code and getting our website moving in the right direction. Welcome to Mastering Kendo UI Video Course Section 2. In this section, we will be doing a high-level overview of getting and applying a Twitter Bootstrap layout. Then, adding the styles needed to make the menu styled like Twitter Bootstrap. We are doing all this work so that we can have a dynamic menu using Kendo UI MVVM, along with the look and feel of Twitter Bootstrap. In this video, we will be doing all the modifications to apply a Twitter Bootstrap layout and add a dynamic menu. Then we will explore the data attributes and the capabilities of Kendo UI MVVM. Let's open the project we have already started and get to work. Your next step is to get hold of a Twitter Bootstrap layout and apply the layout to our index.html page. First, we select the layout we want. Then we select Download and select the bootstrap.min.css. Now let's get started applying the CSS we just downloaded. Just like we have done before, go ahead and upload the CSS file from the last step to the CSS folder and replace the existing bootstrap.min.css. Now open the index.html file and code anywhere. Let's clear all stuff out that falls inside the body tags. Except for the script tags, we're going to start laying out the spa templates to get our site going. We are going to start with the main layout template that will be used for the overall look of our site. See right here, script ID equal layout dash template, type text X Kendo template. Then we have the div class subpage, set a style there. And we could move this to a CSS class, but I just didn't do it yet. Then we have the navigation layout. Then we have the gallery layout. And this is used if you want to put an actual image rotator gallery on your page. Then we have an anchor tag. Then we have the main layout. This is where everything goes for the whole site. Our script tag. Now this looks like a lot of the script tags you have probably done before, but this one has a very important difference. If you will look at the script type attribute, and the type is set to text/x-kendo template, the x-kendo template is not a special Kendo UI thing. All it really does is tell the DOM that this is not a JavaScript template, and the compiler ignores it. Next, we're going to add in a div that will hold our layout template. Div ID main. Here we start the footer tag. Then we give it a container. Add in the simple Twitter Bootstrap row. Now we add in a column that expands all the way across the screen of our row. Now we add in an unordered list with no style applied to it. Here we just add in a simple list item, and it's an anchor tag that takes us back to the top of the page. Now we're just simply closing out our list. Here we just have our copyright info, and I just left the info for the guy who wrote it, and you can see it all here, so if you need help you can email him. Here's the info for the licensing, and here's some source info as to where we got the fonts and some info about the Bootstrap icons. Close out our div, close out the next div, close out the container div, and finally close out the footer. Let's open the main.js file located in the scripts folder. Now most of this is the standard stuff that you already know. I want to call your attention to the EverLive initialization. This is a very important part of getting your site hooked up to the data feed. So go back into the Telerik platform and navigate to the backend services project you created. Select the API keys menu item and copy the API key. Now if you'll notice in your copy of the code, there's a placeholder ready to go. Just highlight the your key here and paste the API key over it. Make sure you keep the double quotes around the key. Now that we have our Twitter Bootstrap style applied and we got the EverLive library ready to go, next we'll be learning about Kendo UI layouts and views. In the last video, we got the Twitter Bootstrap layout applied and the EverLive connection initialized. In this video, we are going to get a different kind of layout working along with putting a view on the screen. Now we are going to get the layout initialized for our website. If you take a look at the section I have highlighted, you will see a layout variable, and it is set to kendo.layout, layout-template. This creates an instance of Kendo UI layout and tells it to use the layout template in index.html as a basis. Then, in the next line, we tell it to render the results of the template and the DOM element with the ID equal main. Now that was really hard. Shazam! We have created a Kendo UI layout. Now, a Kendo UI view is kind of like a page for a regular web application. But in a SPA, a page is called a view, and the code inside of a DOM element just gets replaced with each change of the view. The next section of code that you will see is for routing in our application. For now, just roll with it, and I will give you a full understanding of the Kendo UI router in section 8. Now we have the Kendo UI layout and router in place. Next, we will get our navigation built up and learn a bit more about the Kendo UI view. So in the last video, we got the Kendo UI layout and router hooked up. In this video, we're going to get the navigation view wired up and displayed in the browser. The navigation for our application is in 3 separate parts. First, we have the main section, which are just links to the various pages. Then, we have a blog dropdown, and this is a dynamic list that gets its data from Telerik backend data service. And it comes from the content type blogs. And the final part of the navigation area is the login section. This part looks at the user model to see if the user is authenticated and displays different parts based on if the user has logged in and if the user is in the admin role as well. You need to give me a little bit of trust and faith here. Open the main.js file and let's take a look at the function at the bottom. It is called build nav. This function does some really cool stuff for us. First and foremost, I don't want the website to do anything until it has the navigation created and ready to go. So I'm using jQuery deferreds to control the flow of the application. JavaScript doesn't know or care about what your code is doing. It will call functions and just keep on moving. So in order to have a bit of control, deferreds were introduced. They basically tell the code to wait until the function sends back a response before moving on. After we declared the deferred, we call out to the blogs model and fetch a list of blogs that exist in Everlive. And we wait for the Kendo UI data source to finish the fetch call, and then we start doing some stuff with the views. First, let's look at navigation.htm in the scripts templates folder. As you can see, it is just some basic HTML markup. The important parts are the blog menu layout and the login layout. So the first thing we do is use jQuery to go get the navigation.html file. And then we take that response and use it to create a Kendo UI view, and we attach the navigation model. Now this is where the Kendo UI magic starts happening. What we have just done is we took the navigation.html file and the navigation model and tied them together. So the MVVM mystery is being solved here. Wow, you've just created your first bit of MVVM. Next, we take and get the blogs menu.htm. The big difference this time is we are doing some script inside the template that takes the data in the blog's data source and builds a drop-down menu for us. Last, but certainly not least, we go and get the HTML for login.htm, and we create the login view. And we tell the Kendo UI engine to create a view and bind it to the user model. And in this case, there is some true MVVM going on. Let's open the login.htm file and see how the MVVM stuff is happening. In this section I have highlighted, you see the data bind attribute, and then we have some stuff, invisible : is authenticated. If you look around, there is no definition for is authenticated. Now open up user.js. var user model equal kendo.observable. That is what helps us bring MVVM to life. Now if you scan down just a bit, you see properties being defined. And there it is authenticated, and its value is false. This is the default value I give it. So when we created the Kendo UI view and told it to put login.htm and user model together, the Kendo UI core code started watching the model and the view for changes, and then it fires off change events accordingly. Or another way to look at it is they both get a walkie-talkie and tell each other what's going on. Now that you have the menu working, let's move on. But before you can test our site, we have to go into the Telerik platform backend services and add in at least one blog to the blog content type. Make sure you enter the SEO title without spaces or special characters. Next, we will be checking out how to get the navigation actually doing something. In the last video, we built out the layout and view for the navigation section. In this video, we'll take a quick look at how the router deals with navigation requests and correctly routes the requests. Now let's take a look at these simple navigation links and how the URL is formatted. It's just done with a hashtag home. That is all well and fine, but what is really happening? Well, if you open the main.js, in the highlighted region you will see router equal new kendo.router. Well, that is the Kendo UI router declaration, and it is responsible for handling all the incoming requests. As you read down the list, you can see that I have a router.route set up for each of the basic pages: about, home, and contact. When a request comes in for whatever .com/index.html hashtag about, the Kendo UI router takes the request and intends to match the route format with one of its defined route definitions. In the case of hashtag about, it will ignore the hashtag and find the route definition for about and then do whatever is in the function for that route definition. Currently, all of our route definitions just call into the navigation model and load up different views and content. The most important part is to only call router.start once. If you remember from before, we had the deferred in the build nav. Well, once the deferred is done, we move into the .done section for the deferred, and then we move on into getting the content documents for the site, and then we kick the router off. I have also added some development code in here that automatically logs me into the site, so that while I'm writing code, I don't have to keep logging in every time I refresh my window. Now that we have a basic understanding of routing and how I applied it here, next, we will start creating the content editor for the admin section of the site, and then show you how we update content and display content on the pages. In the last video, we got our site off to a great start. We created the layout using Twitter Bootstrap, learned about Kendo UI layouts and views, and we skimmed the surface of the Kendo UI router. In this video, we are going to get the Kendo UI editor hooked up so that we can edit the content. First, we are going to edit the content.html file in the templates folder. We need to have a spot in the DOM to hold the Kendo UI editor. Because I want you to be able to edit what I call the title area and the body area separately, we are going to create them as two different editable regions. First, let's create a region for the title. Inside of content.html, you will see a div tag that has its data bind set equal to value title. This section basically says, hey, content model, give me the value of the title property and put it here in my DOM. We are going to leave that functionality alone, and we are going to expand on the capabilities of the div by giving it an ID equal to title zone. Now find the next div that has data-bind equal value content. And this one is just like the title zone, except it uses the content property from the content model. Now give its div an ID equal to content zone. We could use data-attributes to fully configure the Kendo UI editor, but it really makes the HTML markup look like crap. So this is handled in the content.js file. So now that we have the DOM ready, I want to get the Kendo UI editor secure. So if you open the user.js file in the scripts models folder and locate the login user function, you will see in the area I have highlighted that if the user details role is equal to this big long crazy key, that means that the user is an admin and we set the property isAdmin equal true. No, doing this by itself is not securing the admin area, but the next part will help pull everything together. Let's open navigation.js in the scripts models folder and go to the load home function. Now in the section highlighted, notice what it says. Content model.load editor. Well, by the name of the function, we are loading the editor, right? Well, that is a partially correct answer. Now we also call the same function in the load about function. You will include this call for every page that gets a content editor and uses the content.htm for its template. Let's open content.js in the scripts models folder. Now let's locate the load editor function and take a closer look at it. First, to start off, we create two variables, one for the title editor and the second for the content editor. And they are both set to the title zone and content zone DOM elements respectively. The part that follows the jQuery selector, .data Kendo editor, says, hey, Kendo UI, create me a Kendo UI editor object using the DOM element XYZ. As long as the jQuery selector locates the element, Kendo UI will then create the widget and place it in the DOM element. Moving on down the code, you will see that we put that isAdmin property to use. We check to see that the person accessing the page is an admin. Then we are going to configure the editor. For the title editor, we first check to see if the editor has already been loaded. If it has, we just move on. If not, then we set up a fairly basic toolbar and some events that will trigger different UI elements when we do something with the editor. For the content editor, we do the same stuff, except this time we build out the full toolbar. Finally, if the user is not an admin, we set a property canEdit equal false. And then if we have the editors loaded into memory, we call the destroy method to clean up memory and remove the events. In this section, we covered adding an inline content editor, editor toolbars, and how you can secure the page so that everyone can't edit your content. Next, we will look at how to get the view and bind it to the model, and how we get data into the content.htm file. So in the last video, we created an inline Kendo UI content editor. We configured two different toolbars and learned how to secure the pages so that only authorized users could see the Kendo UI editor. In this video, we are going to take a short step back and see how the editable pages get loaded and how they are tied to the content model, and finally, how to control some DOM elements from the model. So far, we've only been dealing with pieces and parts and haven't really seen what we are building. So now we are going to code/follow the flow of the application from when it loads to showing content in the page, then editing the content and saving it back to Telerik's backend as a service. Open the index.html file in the main root folder. We're going to start from the beginning. Let's go straight to the bottom. This is where the action takes place. You can see that we are loading a bunch of scripts. And the very last one is main.js. And it has to be last because inside of it we are referencing objects that are contained in the previous scripts like jQuery, Kendo UI, user, content, and navigation. Now open main.js in the scripts folder. It is high time we go through this anyway. We have already talked about the Kendo UI router and we'll skip it for now. Let's just look at what happens when the site loads. You go to / and the Kendo UI router sees that and says, okay, I should send the user to a default page for the site, and it calls a function in navigation.js called load home. Now open navigation.js. Go to the load home function in the navigation model, and it should be line 12 in navigation.js. So in this function, we do a loader.show, then we get into the meat of the code. First, we call out using jQuery to get content.htm and pull back what is read by the get function into a variable called template. Second, we call content model.clearContent. And this function clears the content model and sets it up for new content we are about to load. Third, we call content model.load and pass the page ID that we want loaded. Now open content.js and look at the load function. We set the content model.id equal to page ID that we want loaded. Now we call the function getContent in the content model. The getContent function uses a defer to tell us when it is done looking the content up in the Kendo UI data source. Once it is done, we return back the item from the data source and then call content model.showContent, and the data gets moved along to show content, and we finally set the content model.title and content properties. Shazam! We have loaded the model and the code goes back to navigation.js, and we then take and create a new Kendo UI view and bind it to the model. And what we've done here is true MVVM magic. We take the template, which is the HTML, and we take the content model, which is the Kendo observable object. We tell Kendo UI to make this into an HTML view and bind the content model to it. Then we finally display our new view in the main dash layout. Now you would think that we are done, but hell no, we still have to check if the user is an admin and create the Kendo UI editor, which we covered in the last section. Okay, wow, that was a lot, but we have covered the basic flow of the application from page load to loading content to creating the Kendo UI content editor. And then wrapping things up with a show/hide a div using the visible data-bind attribute and the enabled data-bind attribute. Next, we look at saving our content changes by triggering an event with the data-bind equal events, click, save content. So in the last video, then we went from loading the site and through the router, over the river and through the woods to get our content loaded and editors created or destroyed, depending on the role of the user. In this video, we are going to look at how we can use Kendo UI MVVM to help us control the states of containers and objects. We will specifically look at the visible and enabled bindings. So now we need to turn on/off the save button and show/hide the div that holds the save button. In the function content_model.loadEditor, we have areas that set the can_save and can_edit properties. They get/set a Boolean value depending on if the user is an admin and if they have made any changes to the content. If they are an admin and they click in either the title or content region, we turn on the can_edit div and show the save button. This is really quite simple to do. You can see where I am setting the properties, and you have seen how to get the view and the model bound into MVVM. So now open content.htm in the templates folder, and notice at the end of the HTML there's a div and it has its data-bind attribute, visible, set to can_edit. This ties the div element to the can_edit property and does a show/hide on the div based on the value of can_edit. You could also use the inverse property, invisible, to show/hide your div. Inside the div there is a button, and it is bound to data-bind enabled can_save. And it basically does enable/disable on the button when the user can save changes. The can_edit and can_save are initially set to false when the load editor function is called. I am doing this so that I have a known state for my controls. Both of the content editors have some built-in events that can be wired to help you determine what the user is doing. In this case, I'm using the key down event of the Kendo UI editor. And when the user is actively in a content editor and presses a key, and that key is not a tab key, we set the property can_save equal to true. Now the select event gets fired whenever the user clicks inside the editor. So what I do here is when the user basically goes into edit mode, I show the div that has the save button, but the save doesn't get enabled. The final event I am using is a change event, and it gets fired when the editor blur is fired and the content has changed. There are two more events that I had to manually add for the editors. I had to manually add blur events for the title zone and content zone divs. This is because if you click an editor and don't make a change and leave the editor, the save div is still showing. With the new function catching the blur event, I can turn off the save div and hide it. Now this is a lot of code to show/hide and enable/disable some controls. But it really is just the logic around when to update the controls. The actual controls are updated with the simple properties and data-bind attributes, keeping that wiring super simple. As you can see by looking at content.htm file, I'm using data-bind visible can_edit for the container div, and I'm using data-bind enabled can_save to enable/disable the save button. In this section, we look at how you can enable/disable controls using MVVM bindings. And we learned how to show/hide elements using MVVM. Next, we are going to look at how events are bound to the controls using MVVM. So in the last video, we took a deep dive into controlling the controls and DOM elements. We discovered that we could show/hide elements and enable/disable elements by using the data-bind properties visible and enabled. In this video, we are going to look at how we can trigger events using the data-bind attributes. We are going to specifically look at how to save the content changes in our Kendo UI inline content editors. Okay, so if you remember, when we have talked about the main.js file, there's a section in there where we can create a user and log them in. So you'll need to go into your own Telerik backend data project and add a new user and password and set their role to the ID of the role for the admin. So once that is done, just update the main.js file with your credentials. So now when you run the site, you will get logged in as an admin. Okay, the site is running and we are on the index.html page and we have the home content loaded. If we just click on the title, here's what should happen. A content editor should appear around the title zone and a div should appear at the bottom of the screen in red with a warning to make sure you save your changes. The save button should be disabled. Now if you click off the content editor right or left of the editor, it should disappear along with the big red box. Now we simply update the content and the save button becomes enabled and we can now save our changes. But you say, wait, the save hasn't been coded. Isn't that what this video is for? And I say, well, yes. Yes, it is. So let's switch to the Code Anywhere IDE and open content.html in the templates folder and go take a peek at the save button. Now if you look at the data-bind attribute, you see events, click, save content. And what this does, and when we create the view and do the magical Kendo UI MVVM binding to the model, in the deep bowels of the world, we wire up a click event that will call the save content function in our model. So open up the content.js file in the scripts models folder and locate the save function. The first thing we do is grab a reference to the editors. Then we take the content model.id, which we set when we loaded the content, and find the model in the Kendo UI data source. Then we update the title and the content for the model that the data source has, and then we call the data source sync method. Then the Kendo UI data source will then tell Telerik's backend as a service what needs to be done. In this case, it tells the backend as a service to simply update the page content type and update the title and content with the model title and model content, where the page content type ID equals the model ID. The last thing we do is set the can save and can edit properties to false to turn off the button and hide the big red div. So now if you edit some content and click save, you can see that everything went through just fine, and you can check in the backend as a service page content type and verify that the title and content are correct. And since this is my video, of course they are correct. Alright, in this section we have created some Kendo UI editors and custom toolbars, secured the editors based on the user role, manipulated the DOM using MVVM and data-bind attributes, and saved content and title changes back to the data storage. Next, we will be creating an admin area and a blog manager using the Kendo UI grid and data source. In the last video, we created a content editor. In this video, we will be building an admin area by adding a blog editor along with a blog post editor. Okay, so let's get started with the blog manager. So I am a little OCD and I like to keep major site sections broken up into their logical areas. So in the template section, I added another folder called admin. Inside the admin folder, I added blogmanager.html. I am not saying that this is the only way to lay out your code. This is just how I do it. Anywho, go ahead and let's take a quick peek at blogmanager.html. So in the HTML file, you have to be looking at it and thinking, there is no way this will manage the blogs. Well, I am here to say you're right. Partially. The beautiful thing about having modular code is that we can write a piece of code that gets carried to many spots in the application. For now, you will just need to trust me. So as you look at the HTML, you will run across a div tag with data role grid. So let's go over the settings here. We are telling Kendo UI that this is a grid. And in that grid, we want scrollable, inline edit. We want these columns: title, SEO title, edit, delete, and posts. And finally, we tell Kendo UI to bind our grid to a data source. Now we have been doing this together long enough that you know I have a magical.js file somewhere and it will have a Kendo UI data source in it, and you are right. Go open up blog.js in the scripts models folder. Because of my OCD affliction, I have decided that all the blog models will go into one file. So this file has blogs model and post model. So at the top, you will find the mystery data source defined. And in the data source definition, we set the type to everlive, and the transport type is blogs. Then we tell Kendo UI what the data fields are, and shazam, the data source is defined. So because Telerik's backend as a service is a Telerik product, and Kendo UI is a Telerik product, they have done a great job in integrating their products together. When we are just doing standard CRUD operations, we don't have to do anything special. It is just done for us. We are going to test and make sure that we can create, edit, and delete our blogs. First, just select the Add Blog button and enter a title, a date, and select Save. And make sure that the grid is refreshed and your blog has been created. Now select Edit and change the title and date. Again, select Save and make sure that the values you entered are saved and the grid is updated correctly. Finally, select Delete and make sure that the row is removed from the grid. Now hit F5 to refresh your screen and make sure that your grid is correct. Now since we don't just want anybody editing the blogs, I have implemented some security that follows on the coattails of the content editor. Take a look here at the main.js file in the scripts folder. The section I have highlighted, router.route blog function E. If usermodel.isAdmin equal false, return. Otherwise, we go navigation.load blog manager. And what this code does is it stops someone from accessing the blog manager unless they are logged in as an admin. If they are logged in as an admin, the code will keep going and load up the blog manager. Now that we have a blog manager, and we can create, read, update, delete entire blogs, and it is secured, we need to have a way to add posts to each blog. Next, we'll look at the post manager and how it helps us control blog posts. In the last video, we created our blog manager page. In this video, we will be building a blog post manager and a blog post editor. The blog post manager is kind of like the blog manager. Okay, not really. I did this on purpose. In the blog post manager, we are going to look at creating custom events inside of the magical Kendo UI pre-built events and commands for the Kendo UI grid. So let's start out by opening the template that drives the page. Open postmanager.htm in the templates admin folder. We will just breeze through the HTML and get moving on to the model that controls us. So right here we have a div defined, and in the definition we have data-bind, invisible, and edit. You will have to trust me, there's a property in the post model that is called inEdit. This is used determined if we are in edit mode for our posts. When we load the page, we are not in edit mode, so this div is visible. Now if you look here, you see a grid definition, but the odd thing is that you don't see the data-toolbar defined. That is because just around the grid definition, I have this div created, and the classes are kHeader and k-grid-toolbar. This is a custom toolbar so that we can do some oddball stuff when the button is clicked. Now, back here in the grid definition, I also have two custom commands. One for editing posts and one for deleting posts. So now would be a good time to look at the model. So let's open the model and take a peek at the awesomeness. Open blog.js in the scripts models folder. We want to scroll down to the post model section and look inside the definition. As you scan down the post model, you will see the inEdit property, and it is defaulted to false. As you keep going down, you see the function definitions that are used in the model. And the first one I want to talk about is the bind add button. This function is actually called from the navigation.js navigation model, and it gets called when we go into the post manager. This function hooks up our new add post button. As you can see, it finds the kGrid toolbar class, and then it tells the item that has kGrid add that when you get clicked, don't do a redirect as you would normally do, just to put the post model inEdit value equal to true. Right about the bind add button, we have the delete post, and it does some of the Kendo UI magic by removing the item from the data source and then telling the data source to sync with everlive. Then just above that, we have the edit post function, and it gets the data item from the grid and then sets up our model and puts inEdit equal to true. So I just keep on talking about this inEdit thingamafloppy. And you are thinking, great, we are in edit. We'll go back to the postmanager.html file and look right here. It is another div and it has a data-bind visible in edit. So when I set inEdit equal true, this div becomes visible and the div with the grid gets hidden. In this div, we are now showing we have basically built a form. In that form, I have put what I consider important fields. We have the title and the content, along with the summary and the publish date. Then the last thing we have are submit and cancel buttons. The previous fields are hooked to existing properties so that we can use them for edit and add functions when we are working with blog posts. The two buttons are bound to two new functions called save post and cancel post. And I know it is crazy, but those functions actually do what I named them. So back to the blog.js file, and we will take a look at the save and cancel in the posts model. First, let's look at the cancel post function. We simply say, hey, no mo edit mode, and then we call a private function called clear post, and all it does is clear the values from the model. Now let's look at the save function. The first thing I do here is make sure that my two dates I will be sending to Everlive are valid. Then I look to see if we have a new post or if we are editing one. If this is a new one, I go ahead and create the object called post, assigning the values to it, and throw it in the data source, and then call sync on the data source, which adds it to Everlive, and we are done. If it is a new one, I get the object from the data source and then update the properties. And then for demo purposes, I update the record by using some of the Everlive.js code to update a single object. Then I call data source sync method to get the latest from Everlive. Finally, I flip the switch on inEdit back to false and clear the model. Each time we call data source sync, we are effectively refreshing the grid. Okay, now I want to take you through some of the quirks I have run into with Kendo UI, CSS, and Bootstrap. The big one is around the date picker. And it put up one hell of a fight, but I won in the end. Open up the chili.css file in the CSS folder. These 5 classes are what I have found to be required to get the look and feel that follows the rest of the site. The rest of the site style came from basic Bootstrap and the superhero CSS. In this section, man, that was a lot of stuff, but we wired up the post manager and the post editor. We learned how to use custom commands and functions from the grid and some more samples of data-bind and how to update items in the data source that get auto-updated back to Everlive. We also learned how to manually update an item to Everlive. In this next section, we are going to look at how to display the list of blogs and posts for each blog. In the last video, we created a blog manager, blog post manager, and a blog post editor. In this video, we will be building on top of the last video, adding a blog display to hold our blog posts and show them to the world. We are going to start off by opening the blog.html file located in the templates folder. I want to show you something different in how we can get the data in the view. I have done basic data binding and used a grid to load data. In this page, we are going to use a Kendo UI template. The Kendo UI templates provide an easy way for you to get your data on the screen using JavaScript string building. The big difference in Kendo UI templates and other templating libraries is that instead of syntax magic to make it easier to write your templates, Kendo UI chose performance over easy typing, syntax sugar. The template syntax is easy to understand. To get things out as HTML, you use hashtag equal hashtag. To do HTML encoding, hashtag colon hashtag. If you want some JavaScript in your template, you use hashtag, your JavaScript statements, and then close it out with a hashtag. When you want to create a template, you just create a simple script block and set the type as x-kendo-template. You can set the type as anything as long as it's not text/JavaScript. The text/JavaScript is recognized by the DOM engine and it will try to compile your template as JavaScript. So you can call it anything you want. I recommend text/Chuck is awesome. Now, as I come back to reality, you can see that the template definition at the bottom half of the blog.html. This is really just a layout that will be applied to each blog entry. We put the post title out inside an H3 block, and then the post data is pulled out into an LI tag. And finally, we put the summary out into a P tag. Not rocket science. Now to actually put the template to work, you can load it programmatically, or you can let Kendo UI do it for us. I have decided in this case that we can let Kendo UI do it for us. So in the div up above our template definition, you should be able to see that this is our blog post page. We have an H1 tag that has data-bind set to the blog.title property from the postmodel.blog property. Then you see a div, and I have set the data-role to list view. The next Kendo UI part we do is tell the list view that it needs to use the template we define below to format the data coming from the data source. We tell the list view to allow someone to select items from the list view, and finally we bind this list view with source equal posts. And we tell it that when the selected item changes, to trigger the post selected function in the post model. It's a lot of posts. So let's go back to the post model in the scripts models folder and open blog.js and scroll down to the post model definition. As I'm sure you know by now, we keep reusing items from the model definitions. We're using post data source to display the blog posts in both the public facing and admin facing pages. So don't forget to test both pages when you make code changes. Now take a look at the post selected function. We get a reference to the list view, and from that we find out what the index is that the user selected in the list view. And finally, from that we get the data item for the selected item from the item by the item for the people. Sorry, I just jumped over to a different speech. But anyway, we figure out the post ID, and blog ID. We take all that and navigate off to the next video. Now let's see what we've created. If you open the site in Chrome and then select the blog menu item, we will then be routed to the blog page, and a list of our blog posts will show up. Isn't that friggin' awesome? Okay, so in this video we got the blog page started. We have a new page built with a list view and a template. We get the list of blog posts showing up and added some events to deal with user interactions. Next, we will continue on with getting the user directed to the individual blog posts when they select a post to read. In the last video, we created a blog page. We learned about using Kendo UI templates and a Kendo UI list view. In this video, we will be building on top of the last video by looking at what happens when you select a post to view. We will follow the action from the post selected function all the way to the post.htm page. For a quick recap, let's look at the code the post selected executes. It goes through and first finds the list view, then it finds the selected item in the list view. And finally, it gets the data item from the data source based on the index of the selected item. Now that we have the information, we build out our URL and call router.navigate. This will send us to the post page so that our user can do some reading on a post that we wrote. And we all know that post will be totally worth it. Now, let's get back to reality. When the user selects a post from the list view that we did in the last video, we figure out what post they selected, and then we call router.route and pass in a dynamically built URL. Well, we know that when you call router.route, we end up back in main.js, and you'll see post/*postname. And what this tells us is that when the user selects a post, they come in here, and this is the route that will get fired off. Now we just call navigation model.loadPost and pass in our URL parameters. Next, we get the template for post.htm out of the scripts templates folder. Before we load the template, let's go look at our postmodel.loadPost function. This is a bit of a complex function, but I did this on purpose so that we can handle the situation when a user has bookmarked a post and comes back. We need to be able to load the post and not skip a beat. Once we get into the load post function, we look to see if the blog's model data source has been loaded. If it hasn't, we load it using the blog ID we passed into the function. Then we go get a list of the posts for the blog. And finally, we go get the individual posts. If we have already loaded all the stuff, we just go get the post from the postmodel.posts. So once we have figured out what post we want, we just resolve the deferred and go back to the navigation.js file and continue on processing the function. We get the template, and then just like before, we create a view and pass in the model, and then we add the view to the layout, and we have just loaded our post into the browser. Now please notice the two buttons on the right hand side that get displayed at the top and bottom of the screen. Let's go look at the binding for the buttons. We have hooked them up to the click event, back to blog. Just by reading the event, you can tell that they take you back to the blog list. But if you take a look at the function in the postmodel.backToBlog function, you'll see a crap ton of code. Okay, not really. This is one of the little features of Kendo UI that are way more powerful than words, back. And it simply does just that. It takes us back to where you came from. Okay, let's refresh our site and make sure that everything is working. Start off in the blog list and verify that the blog post list is displayed. That was awesome. We have a sweet blog post list working, and we can select a post to read. And as a freaking bonus, we can go back to the full listing of posts. Next, we are going to take a look at some form stuff by creating a registration page. In the last video, we created a way to show our blog posts and read individual entries. In this video, we will be collecting user information and validating it before letting the user submit their information to us. Let's lay out the form so that our users can input their registration information. We want to collect the first name, the last name, email address, username, password, confirmation password, and a newsletter sign-up field. We start out by simply creating a new div and give it the class of container. And then for each field we want to collect, we wrap it up in this nice little package. We start out with a div, class row. Under that we add a div with the class form-group, that's a Twitter Bootstrap setup, call MD5, call SM10, call XS10. Those are also Twitter Bootstrap settings. Then we add in a label, and in this case we're looking at the first name. We close out the label, and then we add an input type text, class form-control, Twitter Bootstrap. We give it an ID of first name, a name of first name, placeholder is equal to first name. We mark the field as required using HTML5 standards, and then a data-bind value first name, close out the div, and then we add in a div class call MD1 style, margin top 2em, and then inside that we add a span of class k-invalid-message and invalid-message, and then a data-4 first name, close out the span, close out the div, close out the div. We do that for every field, and what that does is it gives us a responsive form that will flex and adjust to whatever device you're on. You'll also notice there was a k-invalid message. The k-invalid message is a Kendo UI validation. It's a placeholder for the invalid message, whether it be text or image. I choose to use images. Okay, so now we're going to move on, and we do this for every single field, as you can see as I highlight every single field that we're collecting. Now, since we want to make this page responsive to the device the user is using, we need to make sure that on devices that fall in or above the Bootstrap definition of a medium device, that the container will be 6 columns wide and be pushed 3 columns to the right. On small devices, our columns will be 8 columns wide and pushed right 2 columns. In this section, we created the form that we will be using to collect user information. We've gone over the HTML and the Bootstrap classes used to make the form responsive. Next, we will be collecting the model using Kendo UI and bringing the form to life. In the last video, we created our registration page and put the form inputs on the page and hooked up the Bootstrap classes to make the form responsive. In this video, we will be adding fields to our user model to bring the form to life. Now we need to add properties to our model so that the registration page will actually work. First, let's open user.js file in the scripts models folder. Now we will add in the new properties. Since I am the world's worst typist, I have already added the fields in my copy of the code. I have added confirm password, first name, last name, email address, and account created. These are used to store information about the user and allow the Telerik backend as a service to do the account email verification. So in the functions, I have added an init function that sets our model up so that when a user selects to create from the navigation bar, we get our fields initialized the way we want them. Then the user fills out the fields on the form and selects the Create Account button on the form, and we go into the Create Account function in the user model. We then simply build out our Telerik user model by getting the username, password, and then set some of the custom fields like display name to the first name plus space last name, and set the role equal registered. This private function underscore create account sends the information to Telerik and then returns that it is done with the deferred.resolve, and our code continues. In this section, we updated the Kendo UI user model for the MVVM portion of our form. Next, we will be going over Kendo UI validation and some tips for using the validation to control user input. In the last video, we created a Kendo UI model for the MVVM portion of our form. In this video, we are going to be implementing some basic form validation. In the last section, we created a model and added some validation to it. Let's look at the code for the model and the basic validation. The last part of our model creates a Kendo UI validator. The validator works by using the name property and the required property of the input controls. In our validator initialization, we have a messages object. We have a required message defined with an image tag. This is our default message that is displayed for all fields that are required and don't have a custom rule. The validator is fired whenever you leave a field and also when the register button is clicked. Let's test our form and make sure the validator is working and we can register. Okay, so we have added validation to our registration page. Next, what we will do is expand on this and add custom validation to test the password fields. In the last video, we added in basic validation for the form. In this video, we will be adding in custom validation for the password and confirm password. The last part of our model creates a Kendo UI validator. The validator works by using the name property and the required property of the input controls. In our validator initialization, we declared a custom rule, verify passwords, and this custom rule makes sure the password and confirm password fields match. For each custom rule, you must have a matching message. So in our configuration for the validator, we have a messages object that also has a verify passwords, and inside of the definition, we have an image tag defined. The validator is fired whenever you leave a field and also when the register button is clicked. Let's test our form and make sure the validator is working for the password and confirm password fields. The fields are both required and must match. We have the validator working in both situations using the basic validation and the required validation. Notice that if I change the custom message to what, that we have an image displayed when a field is missing, and we display what if the fields do not match. We have added all our validation in the model. Next! We can now move on to a full QA of our form and make sure that all the required fields are valid and that the custom validation is working. In the last video, we added custom validation to our basic validation. In this video, we will be fully testing our form to make sure that we are completing all of the required fields and that the custom fields are correct before continuing on to actually saving the data. Let's test our form and make sure the validator is working and we can register. First thing I like to do when testing that forms are working correctly is simply hit the submit button and make sure that the required fields show the validation message by displaying the image next to the fields. Now that we see full form validation is working, Let's start entering data. We're going to enter data into the form and make sure that as each field is entered, the validation message goes away. Finally, as we get to the password and confirm password fields, make sure that when you enter data in the fields, that the error message goes away. You'll have to test them separately because if the values don't match, you will still see the error message displayed because of the custom validation rule. So once you have tested all the fields, the form should submit, and the user registration should return back a successful message. Now that we have created a registration page, the next thing you can do to expand on this is review the source code and add a way to register a user. Next, we will be going over some debugging steps I use and some tricks that I have found useful. In the last video, we completed the code for our blog website. In this next video, we will be going over some troubleshooting techniques using the Chrome developer tools. The developer tools are your best friend when you are working on code that runs your site, or you are working on the CSS that makes your site look good. There are various methods you can use to open the Chrome developer tools. First, you can simply just use the Chrome menu from the top right corner of the Chrome window. Once you have the menu open, you select More Tools, Developer Tools. Second, you can use the F12 key, or you can use Control-Shift-I, and like magic, the Developer Tools console will open. Finally, right-click on any page element and select Inspect Element. In this section, we learned how to open the Chrome developer tools using various commands. Next, we will take a look at the console logging and how it can be a simple but useful tool in debugging your applications. In the last video, we learned how to open the Chrome developer tools console. In this video, we're going to start putting the tools to work. Let's open main.js located in the scripts folder. Now let's take one look at a possible use for console logging. As you already know, when we first come to the site, main.js does a lot of setup work to get the site going. So if we are having a problem and we just aren't sure where to start looking, but we do know that the home page isn't loading, we can use console logging to help get us in the right place to start debugging. That's a side note. I spent 6 years in the US Navy working in electronics, and one of the most common troubleshooting techniques is half-stepping. When you half-step a problem, you go to the problem and then halfway back to the start. Once this point is located, you put in debug statements and see if your problem shows up. And if it does, you step back halfway to the start. And if it doesn't, you step forward halfway to the problem. The reason we are doing this is that it can help us zero in on a problem in a lot less time than starting at the beginning and just randomly checking points in the code. So now, back to our code. We know that the problem happens when we try to load the home page. So if you just sit back and logically look at the code, you will see that the homepage content gets loaded when you call navigationModel.loadHome. So let's open the navigation.js file in the scripts models folder and find the load home function on line 12. In this function, right after line 21, go ahead and we will add a new line and enter console.log navigation.loadHome complete. Double quote, right parenthesis, semicolon. This information will then get written to the console window. Now, go back to the main.js, and if you locate line 19, you will see that it is hooking the router change event to a function that will call console.log and log our route information to the console window. When developing and using the router, this becomes very useful so that you can see the path from the URL, and it will help you work on getting the routes the way you want them. So now we open Chrome, and the first thing you want to do is open the Chrome Developer Tools, and then go to the Console tab. Now, let's go to our site and let's watch the console window. We should be seeing the change event for the router, and then the next message should be navigation.loadHomeComplete. In this video, we've gone over at a high level how to use the console window and how to apply some basic troubleshooting techniques to log messages to the console window. Next, we're going to look at how we can see the source code and step through it using Chrome Developer Tools Source tab. We have built a site and it has style, good looks, and high moral fiber. We have started to learn some basic troubleshooting skills using the Chrome Developer Tools. In this video, we'll be moving forward with our newly found skills and tools. We are going to be learning how to use the Source tab in the Chrome Developer Tools. As we learned in the previous videos, you can get to the Chrome Developer Tools by using the F12 key. Once we have the Tools window open, select the Sources tab and you will see a tree menu on the left. And within that menu, you can navigate to your scripts folder. Here, you can see that I am navigating through the tree to expand the scripts folder. Inside the scripts folder, you see the lib and models folders. And as we look around, we can see the templates folder. Oh, wait! Where's the templates folder? Well, it doesn't show up because we don't have it referenced in the index.html file, so Chrome doesn't know anything about the templates folder. Okay, so in the scripts folder, you will see main.js. Select the file and it will open in the pane on the right. So just to get the ball rolling, let's drop a breakpoint here on line 10. Now just refresh the browser by hitting F5. When you do this, the JavaScript gets refired and should break on line 10 immediately. So there you go. You've just done JavaScript debugging. Bye. Just kidding. But we did get the code to stop and it is ready for debugging. Now go ahead and hit the F10 key. F10 causes the code to step to the very next line. It will continue to step line by line and step over any functions. So line 10 created some local variables. Layout equal new kendo.layout using layout template. Layout.render, and that's a JavaScript selector there, the # main. Now this is not a necessary step, it really just allows us to call code. So after line 11 is executed, let's see how we can look into the value stored inside of a variable. While the code is at the breakpoint, go ahead and select the Console tab. Now just sit back and follow along. In the Console tab, we can look into the content model variable. Just enter content model and press return. Now you can expand the content model and look into the values and functions within it. We have taken a peek into the powers of JavaScript debugging using the Chrome Developer Tools. We can step through and into code, around code, and we can pause code execution. And we can also view the values in the variables. Next, we will take a look at the Network tab in the Chrome Developer Tools. In the last video, we learned about debugging our JavaScript code using the Chrome Developer Tools, along with the Scripts tab inside of the tools. We learned about the F10, F8 keys, and how they help us interact with the code, and we learned that we can pause the code and look into the value of the variables by going to the Console tab. In this video, we will look at another tool that will help us troubleshoot our code. The Network tab can be used to view the network traffic. We can see all the network traffic that is used for the site. The Network tab in the Chrome Developer Tools is a very powerful tool in the arsenal offered by the Chrome Developer Tools. We can see all the requests that the site makes and all the responses from those requests. So with the Chrome Developer Tools window open, I select the Network tab. First thing I want to do is clear the list and start fresh. So I just select the clear icon and wipe the list clean. Now I have a clean list to work from. Let's reload the page by hitting F5. And like magic, our list reloads with a ton of information. Let's just start at the top of the list and we can see the calls that happen to load our page. As a good guess, everything starts with index.html and then just flows down through the HTML. As you follow along, you'll see that we get the CSS files we need and then we load the JavaScript files we need. Now if we jump over here and look at the code for main.js in the scripts folder, you can see that I have it set so that we create the router.routes and then there is a build nav function that gets called. We need the build nav function because we have a dynamic drop down in the menu bar that gets an item for each blog we have on our site. We could have a blog for changing diapers, woodworking, and one for programming. You can see that I have a call to get the blog's data from our data storage. Now we can go open the blog.js file in the scripts models folder and look at how we are getting the data. See this right here at the top data source? The type is Everlive. Yes, I know our data storage is the Telerik backend services, but that used to be called Everlive back in the day. So the type is Everlive and the transport type name is blogs. So what that means to you from now on when you see it is it's really saying, hey, go to the Telerik backend services and use my super top secret password and then go get the content type blogs and return back what you get from it. Now, if you want to look at the traffic, let's switch back to Chrome and let's go look for something like blog, and here we are looking around. So as you can scan through the network traffic list, we see all the CSS, JavaScript stuff. Now let's go see the one called blogs __ equals something. If you just click on it, it will show 4 tabs on the right hand side: header, preview, response, and timing. Let's start off with the headers tab. This is what we're sending out, and as you can see here, we're calling out to the api.everlive.com, and yes, we are passing the API key. This is not a problem because we have the permissions set up correctly on our data storage, so you have to be authenticated to do any damage. Click the preview tab, and in here you will see the data that is coming back from the data storage call. Now look at the response tab, and you can see the results from the call just as they were received from the server. Finally, you can see the timing tab and look at how long it took for all the stuff to come back. So we have seen how the networking tab works when everything is where it's supposed to be. Let's break something and see how the network tab can be used. Open index.html, and right here we'll mess with the href to our bootstrap.css file. Go back to the site, clear the network list, and hit F5, and let's watch the network tab. First off, you can see something has clearly gone wrong. If you look at the network list, you'll see a red entry with the status of 404. And we all know 404 is bad, oh so very bad. You could also go to the console tab and see the red get. And if you copy the URL of the file that we couldn't get and paste it in a new browser, you can troubleshoot what is wrong with the URL. See, I just copy and paste it and try to navigate to the URL. And we get a not found. But a quick inspection of the URL shows that I fat fingered the URL when I put it in index.html file. So now, let's just fix the URL right here in our browser and hit enter. That looks like a CSS file. So we got the URL correct. So let's copy the URL and go fix index.html. Now, go back to our site, hit F5, and wow, it looks a lot better now. Okay, so we've looked at the network tools and how they can help troubleshoot our site and problems with loading data and getting files. Next, the videos get a little more relaxed and we'll be looking at some of the more advanced parts of Kendo UI. In the last video, we learned some troubleshooting techniques using the Chrome developer tools. In this video, we'll be taking a deeper look at the Kendo UI layout. Let's navigate to the demo folder and open layouts views upload_demo.html. Just under the body tag, there is a script tag with the ID = layout template. This is the main layout for our demo page. Next, we have a div with the ID = navigation layout. Now scroll down until you see the nav-template. This is our main navigation design or template. Now, scroll down to the JavaScript at the bottom of the page. What we are doing here is creating a layout, and we add that layout to the div with the ID = main. The next thing we are doing is creating a second Kendo UI layout and adding it to the div that is contained in the main layout. We are basically creating a parent-child layout setup, and this is quite common in SPA applications. In this section, we learned how to create a Kendo UI layout and apply it to the DOM. and then apply a second layout to a div that was contained in the DOM in the first layout, creating a parent-child relationship so that we can have multiple layouts on the screen at one time. Next, we will learn how to create a Kendo UI view and apply it to a Kendo UI layout. We learned how to create a Kendo UI layout and add it to the DOM. We will take a look at the Kendo UI view and how we can use it along with the model and apply it to the Kendo UI layout. We are going to continue where we left off in the last section. We are going to create a Kendo UI view. The view is just like the layout, with the exception that the view is more like a smaller piece of the UI that the user interacts with, and it's tied to a model. So you can think of the layout as a picture frame around an Etch-a-Sketch, and the view is the design the user interacts with, and it can easily be replaced. First, we need to update the demo page with a new script template for holding our Kendo UI view. So we enter script ID equals sample view, type equal text/x-kendo template, just like we've done before. Then we create an h2 tag. We data bind it to first name, and then we create another span and we data bind it to last name. Then we simply close out our script. And yes, this is a simple script, but I am not trying to launch you into space. I am just trying to show you how the Kendo UI view works. Next, let's scroll down to our little section of JavaScript at the bottom of the page. If you noticed, we entered some data-bind attributes in our script. So now we need to create a model that has those properties. So right here at the top of our script, right under the script tag, we need to add in our model. So let's use this. Var sample model equal kendo.observable, first name, colon, single quote, last name, colon, single quote, load, colon, function, fname, comma, lname, sample model.set, first name, comma, fname, sample model.set, last name, comma, lname. Then we just close it out, and then we just close out our model. So really what we've been doing here is lname, fname, set, blah, blah, blah. The set statements actually take and put the property value into the model. So your model property is equal to whatever you pass it. Okay? Well, we're going to keep moving along. You'll get the hang of it. So this is a simple model that has two properties and one function. Now, we need to put the model to work. So let's go into our main function, and right here after the navigation layout.render, I want you to enter this. Sample model.load, single quote Chuck, single quote comma, single quote Catron, single quote, right parenthesis, semicolon. Var view equal new kendo.view, sample view, and then model, sample model. Layout.showIn, main layout, view. This simply calls the load function and passes the first name and last name to the function in the model. The function then sets the properties for us. Next, we just create an instance of the view, and then we bind the view to the model. Finally, in the layout we created, the layout script contained a div with the ID equal main-layout. So what we do to display the view is we tell the layout to find main-layout and show the view in that section. Since we bound the view to the model, the Kendo UI library does a two-way binding action for us and displays the first name and last name in the span tags for us. So what we did here was we created a Kendo UI view and applied it to the Kendo UI layout, and we also learned a tiny bit more about binding and how the model gets bound to the view. Finally, we applied the view to a specified layout section. Next, we are going to take a look at the Kendo UI upload control. We have created a Kendo UI layout and added some Kendo UI views to it. Now we are going to add a third Kendo UI view, and in this view we are going to put a Kendo UI upload control in it and take a look at how we can get images uploaded to our Telerik backend services so that we can store images in the cloud. Okay, let's get rolling with this Kendo UI upload control. I will go ahead and tell you that this solution will not work in IE less than 10, but it does work in IE 10 Plus, Chrome, and Firefox. So first, let's create a new Kendo UI view for the uploader, and then we will get into the actual mechanics of making it work. Add a new script block, script ID equal upload view, type equal text/kendo template. Now we're going to add an input, type equal file. That's an HTML5 specification. ID equal file, name equal files, data-role equal upload, data-bind events, and in the event section we're going to bind the select to the onSelect event. We're just going to create a div here to hold some stuff for us. Div ID equal op. Now close out our script tag. Then we need to create a new instance of Kendo UI view and load this script block so that we can add the view to the Kendo UI layout. Go to the top of the file and we need to add a div for holding our view. As you see here, I have div ID equal upload dash layout, and I just have the text in there, upload layout. It just helps you see things on screen. I put my new div just under the main dash layout div. Okay, now let's go to the bottom and we need to add the JavaScript to create the model for dealing with this view, and then we need to add the view to the layout. We're going to create a model and call it file model. Well, I'm pretty technical like that. And you can see this here. We'll have the file model with the properties for name, type, and last modified date. Next, we have an onSelect function that gets fired when the user selects a file, and we then go into this onSelect function and we process the file. Now, I did leave part of this incomplete, and you can finish that yourself. If the user selects an image file, and that function actually gets the base65 encoded data for the file, and then sends the file to the Telerik backend services for storage. And then Telerik backend services returns back some info about the file as it sits in storage. The part we really need is the URI to the file so that we can update the image source and display the file. You'll also need this user object and this AJAX call right here to call into your own Telerik backend services and authenticate yourself. And you get back a token that you need to hold on to for saving the images and getting back a list of files that you have stored. The last thing we have to do is create a Kendo UI view and bind it to our model. And then we're going to add the view to the upload-layout div in our layout. So now, let's hop back to Chrome and test the Kendo UI upload. First thing we do is we refresh the page. Aha! We now have an input on the screen for selecting a file. So let's see if it works and browse to an image file. And then select it and see that it comes back here to the op div. Ta-da! We have created a Kendo UI upload control and processed an incoming image by saving it to the Telerik backend services. And as a bonus, you got to see how some of the RESTful services for Telerik backend services work. Next, the last thing I want to do is go over the Kendo UI router. In the last video, we took a look at the Kendo UI upload and how to use it with the Telerik backend services to upload images. Now, we return to the SPA type framework and take a peek at the Kendo UI router. So we need to add a Kendo UI router and set it up for our SPA. And in case you didn't know, SPA stands for Single Page Application. Let's open router-demo.html in the demos folder. Start down here in the JavaScript definition. Define a router with basic routes. Router equal new Kendo router #true. And the hashbang setting helps us make the site SEO friendly. Next, define the routes that will be acknowledged by the site. In this case, I just have one route configured, and it simply looks for a /images/:ID. And if the ID is included, we load the image that matches the ID. If an ID is passed that is not found, the current JavaScript poos, and you'll need to handle the error yourself. You will also notice that if we try to just go to images without an ID, we get a console error log telling us that we screwed up the route and it doesn't exist. Okay, so we looked at the router and how to load all the images from our Telerik backend as a service. The last part was a bit of a bonus. For more information and a huge set of demos, go to http://www.telerik.com/KendoUI and check out all the demos. You can also get to the API and help docs by going to docs.telerik.com/kendo-ui/introduction and get to a really useful tool, the Kendo UI Dojo, by going to telerik.com. Also, on a last note, you can open nearly every demo into the dojo so you can easily see how the demo was put together and teach yourself some Kendo UI. Bye.